Picture this. You are standing on the edge of a massive, roaring stadium, surrounded by a sea of flashing light sticks and tens of thousands of screaming fans chanting the names of 8 boys who completely redefine the sound of modern K-pop. Stray Kids. Today, they are global icons, chart-topping giants, and an unstoppable self-produced force. But what if I told you that the 8-member powerhouse we know today almost looked completely different? What if the puzzle pieces we take for granted were nearly shattered before the picture could even be formed? Behind the explosive beats, the complex choreographies, and their legendary brotherhood lies a dark, stress-induced history of survival, brutal JYP elimination rounds, and painful decisions that nearly altered the course of K-pop history forever. Who was packed up and sent home, only to be saved by a literal miracle? Which member was told his skills simply weren't enough to survive? Let's unlock the secrets behind the lineup. Number 7. Hyunjin. The Magne's Silent Tears, a battle against inadequacy. When you look at young Hyunjin today, the beloved vocal powerhouse and charismatic youngest member of Stray Kids, it is hard to imagine a time when his presence in the group was questioned. But back in 2017, during the grueling days of the Net Survival show, a 16-year-old Hyunjin was standing on a razor's edge, constantly fighting a silent battle against his own perceived inadequacy. He was the cute boy from Busan with the signature metal braces and bright, eye smile that charmed the fans, but behind that innocent facade lay a terrifying reality. JYP was not convinced he belonged in the final lineup. In the cutthroat world of K-pop, being the youngest and most adorable member is never enough to secure a debut, and Hyunjin was forced to learn this lesson in the most brutal way possible. Every single week, the evaluation rooms of JYP Entertainment felt less like a training ground and more like a courtroom where his dream was put on trial. JYP's critiques were sharp, relentless, and publicly humiliating for a teenager. He was told his vocals were highly unstable, his dancing was noticeably slower than the rest of the group, and his overall performance lacked the polished execution required for a professional idol. Every time the camera focused on Hyunjin during those evaluation episodes, you could see the sheer panic in his eyes. A young boy desperately trying to hold back tears while holding a microphone with trembling hands. What made his struggle even more painful was the physical limitation of his braces. They caused friction against the inside of his mouth, making it incredibly painful to enunciate lyrics clearly and sing with the power JYP demanded. Yet, Hyunjin chose to suffer in silence. He developed a defense mechanism that both endeared him to viewers and broke their hearts. He smiled. No matter how harsh the criticism, no matter how much his soul was crushed, Hyunjin would bow his head and smile, trying to reassure the staff and his members that he was fine. But the older members knew better. They watched him slip away to the dark corners of the JYP restrooms, locking himself in the stalls just to let the tears flow where no one could see them because he didn't want to bring down the morale of the team. He carried the massive, crushing weight of feeling like a burden, constantly terrified that his lack of training would drag down his brothers, especially Bang Chan, who had dedicated 7 long years of his life to this moment. Hyunjin knew that if he failed, he wasn't just failing himself. He was destroying the dreams of the 7 other boys who had embraced him as their little brother. During the preparations for the critical busking mission, the pressure reached an all-time high. Hyunjin's vocal pitch kept wavering, and the choreographer pointed out his delayed reaction times in the group formations. He was working on pure adrenaline and lack of sleep, practicing the same dance moves hundreds of times until his knees bruised and his throat burned. But the gap between him and the seasoned trainees still felt like an ocean. There were nights when Bang Chan would stay up with him until the sun rose, patiently correcting his posture, holding his hands to steady his breathing, and whispering words of encouragement into the dark, empty practice room. The bond between them was the only thing keeping Hyunjin from packing his bags and returning to Busan. During the actual busking performance, under the cold night sky and in front of a live crowd and JYP's watchful eyes, Hyunjin gave everything he had, but the fear of elimination hung over him like a dark cloud. When the evaluation came, JY Park noted that while Hyunjin's smile was bright, his performance was still the weakest link, a statement that felt like a death sentence to the young trainee. He was placed on the verge of elimination, warned that if he did not show a dramatic improvement in the next round, he would be cut immediately. The emotional toll of that warning was devastating. Hyunjin had to look into the eyes of his members, knowing that his survival in the group was hanging by a single thread. He spent the following days in a trance of sorts, pushing his body to the absolute limit, singing through the pain of his bleeding gums, and forcing himself to command the stage with a confidence he did not feel. It was a make-or-break moment that tested the very limits of a teenager's mental and physical endurance. The fear of being sent home, of returning to his normal life as a failure while his friends went on to become stars, was a ghost that haunted his every step. Even during the group's downtimes, while other members tried to relax or joke around, Hyunjin could be found in front of the practice room mirrors, repeating the choreography sequences until he memorized every micro-movement. The older members would frequently try to feed him and make him rest, but his determination to prove his worth was unshakable. He knew that the line between being a celebrated artist and an forgotten trainee was razor thin, and he was standing right on it. If he had given in to the exhaustion, if he had let the constant criticism break his spirit, Stray Kids would have lost their precious Magne, and the vocal dynamic of the group would have been forever altered. Young Hyunjin survived by the skin of his teeth, turning his vulnerability into a weapon, but the scars of that survival show remain a testament to just how close he came to being left behind in the shadows of JYP's training basement. Today, we see him standing tall, hitting notes effortlessly, and command the stage with absolute confidence, but we must never forget the quiet tears of the 16-year-old boy who fought tooth and nail just to stay by his brother's side. Number 6. Kim Seungmin, the invisible vocalist, breaking the mold of average. When we talk about the backbone of Stray Kids music, Kim Seungmin's clean, emotive, and crystal-clear vocals are absolutely indispensable. But during the pre-debut era in 2017, Seungmin's greatest strength, his stability, was almost the very thing that got him eliminated from the group. Seungmin entered JYP Entertainment after winning second place in the highly competitive 13th Open audition, a feat that proved his raw talent and dedication. He was a model trainee, disciplined, always on time, and possessing a textbook-perfect singing technique. However, in the high-stakes environment of the Stray Kids survival show, being perfectly standard was a double-edged sword that almost cost him his dream. JY Park did not want a traditional, clean-cut K-pop group. He wanted a group of raw, unique rebels who carved out their own path. In this landscape, Seungmin's clean vocals and polite demeanor were criticized for being too plain, too safe, and lacking the distinctive color needed to stand out. While other members grabbed attention with their aggressive rap styles, explosive dancing, or striking visuals, Seungmin found himself fading into the background, becoming almost invisible to the judges. In a survival show, invisibility is a silent killer. If you are criticized heavily, you at least have a narrative of growth. If you are praised, you are safe. But if you are simply deemed average, you are the easiest target for elimination. The psychological pressure of this realization was immense for Seungmin. He was constantly evaluated as a middle-of-road trainee who didn't quite fit the wild, energetic vibe of Stray Kids. JY Park explicitly warned him that stable singing was not enough to debut, demanding that he show a unique artistic identity that could not be replaced. This feedback shook Seungmin to his core. He was a perfectionist who had trained himself to sing everything correctly, and now he was being told that his correctness was his biggest flaw. The fear of being cut not because he failed, but because he failed to make an impression, haunted him every single day. To combat this, Seungmin began a relentless, self-directed vocal overhaul. He started keeping detailed vocal diaries, a habit he maintains to this day, writing down every minor adjustment in his breathing, pitch, and emotional delivery. He spent hours alone in the recording booths, trying to distort his clean vocals to find a rasp, a depth, or an edge that would satisfy JY Park's demands. He forced himself to step out of his comfort zone, trying to inject raw, unpolished emotion into his delivery rather than focusing purely on technical perfection. It was an incredibly painful process of dismantling everything he had learned and rebuilding himself from scratch under the threat of imminent elimination. This pressure reached a boiling point during the unit mission, where Seungmin was grouped with Miho and Felix. It was a grouping that put him under the ultimate test, as both of his unit members were struggling with their own massive hurdles. Seungmin felt a double layer of responsibility. He had to elevate his own performance to avoid elimination, but he also had to act as the vocal stabilizer for his unit, ensuring they didn't fall apart on stage. The weight of knowing that a single mistake from any of them could lead to the elimination of his friends was almost too much for a teenager to bear. In the practice rooms, Seungmin would patiently guide the others through the vocal guides, showing a maturity far beyond his years, even as his own hands shook from exhaustion. He had to find a way to make his voice shine while harmonizing with his teammates, transforming his clean style into something that could blend seamlessly with the unit's dance-focused dynamic. JY Park's eyes were laser-focused on him during the showcase, searching for the moment Seungmin would slip into mediocrity. It was a terrifying tightrope walk. If Seungmin had allowed the fear of his unit's vulnerability to break his focus, or if he had let his vocals falter under the stress, he would have been an easy target for JY Park's elimination pen. He knew that the team needed a strong vocal anchor to balance the aggressive rap of 3 Racha, and if he couldn't prove he was that anchor, the entire structure of Stray Kids would collapse. The turning point came when he began to show glimpses of his true potential, blending his stable technique with a raw, emotional delivery that finally caught JY Park's attention. He proved that stability did not have to mean boring. But the path to that realization was a lonely, terrifying journey where Seungmin had to constantly fight against the label of being just okay. If he had not pushed past his own perfectionism, if he had accepted the critique that his voice was too plain and failed to adapt, JY Park would have easily replaced him with a trainee who had a more conventional or flashy style. Stray Kids would have lost the very voice that gives their melodies emotional depth and structure. Seungmin's survival in the group was a testament to his quiet resilience and his refusal to be left behind as the invisible member, proving that sometimes the quietest battles are the ones that require the most strength to win. Today, he stands as one of the most respected vocalists of the 4th generation, but his journey reminds us of how close his voice came to being silenced before the world could ever hear it. Number 5. Hyunjin, the visual curse, fighting to prove he is more than a pretty face. Today, Hyunjin is celebrated as one of K-pop's most mesmerizing performers, a modern dance icon whose theatrical expressions and fluid movements command millions of views. But before he became the crown jewel of Stray Kids' performance line, Hyunjin was locked in a brutal war against a label that nearly destroyed his career before it even began, the label of being just a visual. Street-casted by a JYP representative simply because of his striking looks, Hyunjin entered the agency with zero background in dancing or singing. In the hyper-competitive world of JYP trainees, where kids train for years to master basic steps, Hyunjin's sudden arrival sparked immediate skepticism. Other trainees, jealous of his natural aesthetics, would casually throw passive-aggressive comments his way, telling him he had nothing to worry about because he would easily debut based on his face alone. To anyone else, this might sound like a compliment, but to Hyunjin, a boy driven by fierce pride and an almost obsessive work ethic, it was a humiliating insult that stripped away his humanity. He refused to be a decorative prop in a group designed to be raw and self-produced, and this refusal ignited a dangerous, self-destructive obsession with perfection. During the pre-debut survival show, the pressure on Hyunjin was suffocating. JY Park, knowing how easy it is for visuals to hide behind their looks, subjected Hyunjin to a level of scrutiny that was terrifyingly intense. During the early evaluations, JY Park pointed out that Hyunjin's pronunciation was incredibly sloppy during his rap parts, warning him that if listeners could not understand his words, he was useless to the team's vocal dynamic. For Hyunjin, who had spent sleepless nights trying to master his delivery, this critique was a devastating blow. To fix his pronunciation, he resorted to the grueling and painful method of practicing his raps with a pen clenched tightly between his teeth, reciting his lines thousands of times until his jaw locked and his mouth bled. His struggle was further complicated by the lack of initial support from home. His family was skeptical of his sudden career path, with his mother half expecting him to fail the grueling training program and return to a normal school life. This lack of a safety net made the stakes even higher for him, turning every evaluation into a literal life or death scenario for his ambition. When JY Park criticized his rap, it was Changbin who stepped in, spending hours with Hyunjin in the dark hallways, teaching him how to project his voice from his diaphragm and how to accent his words to mask his pronunciation issues. Chan, too, would sit with him on the cold floor, wrapping an arm around his shaking shoulders as Hyunjin wept from sheer exhaustion. These moments of brotherhood were the only things that kept him from walking out the door. He was fighting a war on two fronts, one against his own physical limitations, and another against the predefined stereotypes of the industry. The pen-in-the-mouth practice became a daily ritual of torture, causing constant muscle spasms in his face, but he refused to spit the pen out until he could recite his entire verse perfectly. But the vocal critiques were only half the battle. His dancing was also under constant fire. Determined to prove that he belonged in the main dancer line, Hyunjin pushed his body past the point of safety. He would lock himself in the practice room long after the other trainees had gone to sleep, dancing under the dim emergency lights until his shirt was soaked and his muscles screamed in agony. He would watch recordings of himself frame by frame, sobbing in frustration when his movements did not match the clean, sharp lines of the seasoned dancers. The fear of being the visual trainee who got cut because he couldn't keep up with Bang Chan's vision was a constant, haunting presence. Hyunjin knew that Bang Chan had hand-picked this team based on talent and synergy, and he was terrified of being the weak link who was only kept around for aesthetics. During the unit mission, JY Park watched his every move with a critical, unforgiving eye, searching for any sign that Hyunjin was slacking or relying on his looks. The emotional weight of this constant evaluation took a massive toll on Hyunjin's mental health. He became hyper-focused on his flaws, falling into deep bouts of self-doubt where he questioned if he even belonged in the entertainment industry. There were moments during the survival show when Hyunjin looked completely exhausted, his eyes hollow, and his usual bright energy replaced by a tense, nervous desperation. He knew that the public and JY Park were waiting to see if he would crumble under the pressure. When the final evaluation approached, Hyunjin's eyes were bloodshot from lack of rest, but the fire in him was brighter than ever. He went onto the stage and performed with a fierce, untamed aggression that finally forced JY Park to acknowledge his growth, not just as a visual, but as a genuine performer who had earned his place. If he had given in to the exhaustion, if he had accepted the easy route of being a passive visual, JY Park would have easily eliminated him, viewing him as someone who lacked the grit and raw artistry required for a group like Stray Kids. Hyunjin's survival was not a stroke of luck. It was the result of a teenager bleeding, crying, and breaking his body to earn the respect of his peers and his producer. If he had not fought that silent, painful war against the visual curse, Stray Kids would have lost their most dramatic performer, and the stage presence of the group would have lacked the electric, theatrical energy that Hyunjin now effortlessly brings to every single show. His journey is a powerful reminder that sometimes the hardest battle is not proving your worth to others, but proving to yourself that you are worthy of the dream you are chasing. Number 4. Hyunjin, the 1-year ultimatum, a race against time and anxiety. Hyunjin is widely recognized today as K-pop's ultimate all-rounder, a musical genius who can rap at lightning speed, hit high notes with operatic ease, and write chart-topping hits in a matter of minutes. But the story of how Han almost missed his chance to be in Stray Kids is a high-stakes race against a ticking clock and a silent, internal battle with mental health that nearly sent him packing back across the ocean. Unlike many trainees who spend their entire adolescence in Korea waiting for their chance, Han's journey began in Malaysia, where he lived with his family. He had a deep, burning passion for music, but his parents were highly skeptical of the volatile entertainment industry, viewing it as an unrealistic dream. After much pleading, Han struck a desperate bargain with his parents. They would allow him to return to South Korea alone to pursue music, but only under one strict condition. He was given a 1-year ultimatum. If he could not sign a contract with an entertainment agency within 12 months, he had to immediately abandon his musical dreams, return to Malaysia, and focus on standard academic studies. For a teenager, that 1-year deadline was a ticking time bomb, a constant source of existential dread that followed him into every audition room. He spent months receiving rejection after rejection, watching his precious time slip away until he finally managed to pass JYP's auditions at the very last minute. The irony of his journey is that he almost didn't even step into the JYP audition room. On the day of the audition, Han had no plans to participate. He had simply tagged along with a friend who wanted to see if they could spot some famous JYP artists in the building. It was only when his friend encouraged him to just go in and give it a try that Han decided to audition on a whim. If he had decided to stay home that day, or if he had simply waited in the lobby, the 1-year deadline his parents set would have quietly expired, and he would have returned to Malaysia to live a life completely detached from music. Once he did get in, the pressure was relentless. During the pre-debut days, JY Park was highly critical of the trainees' self-producing capabilities, meaning Han, Bang Chan, and Changbin had to write, compose, and record tracks under extreme deadlines, often with only 24 hours to deliver a finished song. This constant state of high-alert stress compounded his social anxiety, making him feel like he was constantly running on empty. Despite his loud, energetic, and comical persona on camera, Han suffered from a paralyzing fear of large crowds and intense public scrutiny. In the survival show, this anxiety became a physical wall he had to climb every single day. The show demanded that the trainees perform in front of live crowds and face the cold, unforgiving critiques of JY Park. During the preparation for the busking mission in the crowded streets of Sinchon, Han's anxiety reached a breaking point. The prospect of performing on an open street, surrounded by hundreds of strangers staring at his every movement, made his heart race and his chest tighten to the point where he could barely draw a breath. He has since opened up about how he sometimes feels completely dizzy and overwhelmed in crowded spaces, feeling an intense urge to escape and hide. During those pre-debut days, a single visible panic attack on stage could have ended his career instantly, as JY Park was looking for trainees who were mentally resilient enough to withstand the grueling idol lifestyle. Han had to force his trembling body onto the stage, masking his terror with a swagger and confidence he did not feel. Behind his flawless, energetic rap verses was a boy who felt like the room was spinning, desperately holding onto the beat to keep himself from collapsing. When his close friends Miho and Felix were eliminated, Han felt his world fracturing. The emotional pain of seeing his brothers get sent home while he remained safe was a survivor's guilt that amplified his anxiety, making him question if he even deserved to debut. He had to perform the final stages with a heavy heart, knowing that the dream they had built together was falling apart. Every performance became an emotional battlefield where he had to fight off panic attacks while delivering high-speed raps and sustaining flawless high notes. It was a brutal test of character that would have broken most adults, let alone a teenager. Han's ability to lock his anxiety in a box the moment the music started was nothing short of heroic. He knew that if he slipped up, if he allowed his anxiety to paralyze him during a critical evaluation, he would not only let down his team, but he would also be forced to board a plane back to Malaysia, leaving his music behind forever. The fear of that failure was the only thing that pushed him through the panic. If Han had succumbed to the crushing weight of his anxiety, or if he had run out of time during that crucial 1-year window, Stray Kids would have been deprived of their most versatile ace. His presence in the final lineup is a victory of sheer willpower over a ticking clock and the silent storm in his own mind, proving that sometimes the greatest talent is the ability to perform through your own fear. Number 3. Bang Chan. 7 years of solitude, the leader who almost walked away. Without Bang Chan, Stray Kids simply does not exist. He is the mastermind, the producer, the protector, and the father figure who hand-selected every single member to create the group. But the reality is that Bang Chan was almost a ghost in the JYP archives, a trainee who nearly walked away from the industry entirely after 7 long years of waiting in the shadows. Chan joined JYP Entertainment in 2010 as a young boy from Australia, full of bright dreams and raw talent. Coming to Korea as a child, Chan had to navigate the cultural shock of a highly disciplined society while dealing with the language barrier and the lack of a family support system. In Australia, he had a free outdoor lifestyle, but in Korea, he was locked in concrete rooms for 12 hours a day. However, the K-pop training system is a grueling test of endurance, and Chan's endurance was stretched to the absolute limit. Year after year, he watched his closest friends, the ones he ate, laughed, and sweated with, get selected for debut. He watched GOT7 debut in 2014, Day 6 in 2015, and twice in 2015. He stood in the audience at their showcases, clapping for his friends, only to return to the empty, silent practice rooms alone, wondering if his turn would ever come. His close bond with Bam Bam and Yugyeom of GOT7 made their debut particularly hard to watch. They had been his peers, and suddenly they were stars on television while he was still cleaning up the practice room floors. He began to feel like a relic of the training system, a safety net that JYP kept around but never intended to use. The psychological toll of this waiting game is impossible to overstate. Chan began to suffer from intense feelings of isolation and self-doubt, constantly questioning why he was being left behind. Was his music not good enough? Was his voice not appealing? The pressure from his family and his own internal clock grew heavier with each passing year. He has since admitted that there were multiple times during those 7 years when he was on the verge of packing his bags, quitting JYP, and returning to Sydney to live a normal life. He felt like he was wasting his youth in a basement, chasing a mirage that kept moving further away. This isolation drove him deeper into his work, transforming him into a workaholic. He practically moved his bed into the JYP recording studio, surviving on coffee, energy drinks, and instant convenience store meals. He neglected his own health, developing chronic sleep deprivation that persists to this day, all to master the art of music production. The turning point came when JYP finally gave him a unique, final opportunity. Instead of placing him in a pre-made group, they allowed him to build his own team. Chan poured his heart and soul into selecting the members, choosing boys who were not necessarily the top-ranking trainees in terms of technical skill, but who possessed a raw chemistry and a shared hunger for success. But this creative freedom came with a terrifying catch. When JYP launched the survival show, the company wasn't just testing the trainees, they were testing Chan's judgment. Every time JY Park criticized the group's performance, it felt like a direct indictment of Chan's leadership. The absolute nadir of this journey occurred when Miho and Felix were eliminated. For Chan, this was a soul-crushing failure. He had made a solemn promise to the boys that they would debut together as 9, using the phrase "step out" to symbolize their unity. When JY Park cut Miho and then Felix, Chan felt an overwhelming sense of survivor's guilt and responsibility. JY Park would look Chan in the eye and ask, "Why is your team member struggling? That is your responsibility." This psychological pressure was a form of torture. He was being blamed for the crushed dreams of his friends. The scene of Chan crying in the practice room after Felix's elimination, apologizing to the younger boy and blaming himself for not working harder, saying, "I'm so sorry, I should have run faster, I should have worked harder," is one of the most heartbreaking moments in K-pop history. He was carrying the weight of 8 other lives on his shoulders, all while running on 0 sleep, composing songs, arranging choreographies, and trying to keep his own mental health from fracturing. Yet, he had to wake up the next day, put on a brave face, and lead the remaining members to the final stage. If Chan had given in to his despair during those dark years of waiting, or if he had cracked under the immense pressure of the survival show's eliminations, the entity known as Stray Kids would have died before it was ever born. He was the glue holding a broken mirror together, and his resilience in the face of absolute exhaustion is the sole reason these 8 boys are standing on stage together today. His story is a masterclass in patience, showing that sometimes the longest waits lead to the most legendary paths. Number 2. Lee Know. The first casualty. the dancer, who was cast into the cold. Lee Know is widely recognized today as the dance leader of Stray Kids, a performer with razor-sharp precision and a unique, eccentric personality that fans adore. But in the early winter of 2017, Lee Know, then known simply by his birth name, Lee Miho, became the first tragic casualty of the Stray Kids survival show, experiencing the devastating pain of having his dream ripped away in front of a national audience. Miho's journey into JYP was unlike anyone else's in the group. He was already a seasoned dancer, having worked as a backup dancer for superstar group BTS during their massive Wings tour. He had tasted the energy of stadium crowds, but he was tired of dancing in the shadows of others. He wanted to be the one standing in the center of a stage. He joined JYP Entertainment late, with only a few months of formal training experience before being thrown into the pressure cooker of the survival show. Miho had only trained at JYP for roughly 8 months, a mere blink of an eye compared to the years his peers had logged. This lack of JYP-specific training proved to be a fatal vulnerability. While the other members had spent years adjusting to the agency's strict vocal and performance standards, Miho had to catch up in a matter of days. During the preparation for the critical elevator evaluation in episode 4, the pressure was immense. Miho was struggling to balance the high-pitched vocals with the aggressive choreography. Under the intense, icy gaze of JY Park, nerves got the better of him. During the live showcase, he made a tiny, split-second mistake with the lyrics of his rap part. To an ordinary viewer, it was barely noticeable, but to JY Park, it was proof that Miho was not ready. The producer criticized his lack of vocal stability and remarked that he looked terrified on stage, lacking the confidence of a debut-ready artist. When the elimination announcement came, the room fell into a suffocating, disbelief-filled silence. JY Park called Miho's name, declaring that his journey with the group was over. The emotional shockwave that hit the members was catastrophic. Ban Chan, who had promised to bring everyone to the finish line, looked completely broken, his eyes filled with tears of failure. The night he was eliminated, the members gathered in his small room, sitting on the floor in absolute silence, holding on to him as if they could physically prevent him from leaving. The packing of his suitcase was a slow, agonizing process. Every shirt and shoe he put away felt like a piece of his dream being sealed in a coffin. Miho, trying to remain strong for his brothers, packed his bags and walked out of the dorms, returning to the quiet life of a normal citizen. Returning home to his parents was a quiet nightmare. He had to look into the eyes of the people who had cheered for him, only to tell them that he had failed. The contrast was brutal. One day he was a rising star practicing with his brothers, and the next he was sitting alone in his bedroom, watching the survival show continue on television without him. The psychological impact of being publicly rejected and labeled as not good enough would have caused many people to abandon the industry forever. But Miho possessed a quiet, stubborn resilience. Instead of wallowing in self-pity, he used the rejection as fuel. He spent his days in private dance studios and local karaoke rooms, singing and dancing until his body ached, practicing the group's new choreographies from the broadcast episodes. He refused to let his story end as a footnote in K-pop history. This dedication paid off when, in a surprise twist in episode 9, JY Park decided to give the eliminated members one final chance to perform in the live finale. When he received the call from the staff telling him JY Park wanted him back for the final live show, Miho felt a rush of adrenaline mixed with sheer terror. He only had a few days to memorize the entire setlist of the final showcase, including complex formations he had never performed with the group before. The pressure on Miho during this return was double what it had been before. He had to step back onto the stage not just to perform, but to prove that JY Park's original decision to eliminate him was a mistake. During the final live broadcast, as the lights flared and the bass boomed, the crowd erupted into deafening cheers, chanting Lee Miho with a passion that shook the rafters. He stood on that stage with a fire in his eyes, executing the choreography with a lethal precision that left no room for doubt. JY Park, watching from the judges' table, had to admit that Miho's presence elevated the group's performance to a professional level. If Miho had allowed the trauma of his initial elimination to breed resentment or fear, or if he had slackened in his training during his weeks of exile, he would have failed the live evaluation and been cut permanently. Stray Kids would have been left without their primary dance anchor, and their stage performances would have lacked the clean, synchronized authority that Lee Know now brings to every show. His survival is a testament to the power of a second chance and the stubborn refusal to accept defeat, proving that a setback is only temporary if you have the grit to fight your way back. Number 1. Felix, the accent of fate, the Aussie who nearly lost his voice. If you ask any K-pop fan to name the most iconic voice in the fourth generation, they will immediately point to the impossibly deep, rumbling baritone of Felix. But in the winter of 2017, that very voice was nearly silenced forever. Felix, born and raised in Sydney, Australia, packed his life into a single suitcase and flew to South Korea with nothing but a dream and a passion for dance. Moving from the laid-back, sun-drenched suburbs of Sydney to the high-pressure, hyper-fast metropolis of Seoul was a massive shock to Felix's system. He was a teenager who had left his parents, his sisters, and his friends behind to live in a crowded dorm with strangers. The language barrier was a constant, isolating prison. He couldn't read the signs on the street, he couldn't understand the jokes his members made, and he often sat in silence during dinners, feeling like a ghost in the room. During rehearsals, when choreographers yelled out complex formations in rapid Korean, Felix would freeze, relying on visual cues and the frantic hand gestures of the other members to know where to stand. This lack of fluency directly impacted his confidence, making his stage presence appear timid and hesitant to JY Park. JY Park was adamant that a K-pop idol must be able to communicate flawlessly with the audience and convey the deep emotions of the lyrics they perform. Because Felix struggled to understand the rapid-fire Korean instructions from the staff and choreographer, he was constantly playing catch-up. During evaluations, his pronunciation in his rap parts was criticized as unnatural and muddled, making it difficult for the judges to understand his verses. During the Episode 8 evaluation, JY Park noted that while Felix's physical dance ability was impressive, his lack of Korean fluency made his rap part sound disjointed and lacked the necessary emotional punch. JY Park stated, "The biggest problem is your pronunciation. You need more time." This statement was the final nail in the coffin. The elimination announcement was a visceral trauma for the entire group. Ban Chan's reaction was not just the grief of a leader, but the heartbreak of a big brother who felt he had broken a sacred trust with Felix's family. The iconic image of Felix, his freckled face stained with tears, bowing his head and repeating, "I'm sorry, my Korean is not good," left an indelible mark on the viewers. After leaving the dorms, the loneliness was suffocating. Felix lived in a temporary studio apartment, staring at the walls, wondering if he should just give up and buy a ticket back to Australia. But he chose a path of radical resilience. He bought Korean grammar books, filled notebooks with vocabulary words, and watched Korean dramas with subtitles to learn natural conversational phrasing. He practiced his pronunciation by repeating the news anchor's words on television. When JY Park finally relented and allowed him to perform in the live final, the stakes were astronomical. The final broadcast featured a live vote where the public had to choose between the 7-member version and the original 9-member version. The fans, who had fallen in love with Felix's sweet personality and deep voice, voted overwhelmingly, 96%, for the return of the eliminated members. When the 9-member version performed Elevator, Felix stepped forward, his eyes blazing with a fierce determination, and delivered his deep-voiced intro with a confidence that shook the entire studio. JY Park, forced to acknowledge the public's demand and the undeniable chemistry of the full group, finally declared that Stray Kids would debut as 9. If Felix had allowed the humiliation of public elimination to break his spirit, Stray Kids would have lost their most famous vocal color. His return is a testament to the fact that sometimes the voice that defines a group is the one that had to fight the hardest to be heard. What these 7 stories reveal is that Stray Kids' legendary success was never a pre-written destiny. It was a fragile, hard-fought victory born out of pure desperation, sacrifice, and an unbreakable brotherhood. From the youngest Magne fighting through the physical pain of his braces, to the visual battling a stereotype, the vocalist breaking the mold of mediocrity, the genius overcoming social anxiety, the leader surviving 7 years of isolation, and the two members who literally had to rise from the ashes of public elimination. Every single member of Stray Kids was tested to their absolute limits. IT is this shared trauma and survival that forged their legendary bond, creating a group that refuses to let anyone fall behind. Their journey teaches us a powerful, edutaining lesson about resilience, that true strength is not about never failing, but about having the courage to rebuild yourself, support your brothers, and fight for your place in the spotlight. Stray Kids stands today as a global phenomenon not because they were perfect, but because they survived the fire together.